Good evening. I trust you had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, though I hope it has been happy. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. So we are continuing with this discourse, number 44, called the shortest series of questions and answers. And we've been through the section concerning Sakkaya Ditthi, or the identity, personhood, personality, person view, eightfold path, concentration, and the sankhara, the volitional formations and all that. So now the next section, really, we don't have to go through in detail. It's called the cessation of feeling and perception. And it's a specific experience that comes after somebody has attained all the jhanas. So there are four what are called rupa jhanas, or jhanas that depend upon some object, such as metta or the breath. And then there are the arupa jhanas, which are not dependent on that, but have the same quality, the same mental quality of perfect equanimity that one comes to in the fourth jhana, the fourth absorption. And there are four of those arupa jhanas, the jhanas which don't have an actual specific object. Now, if you happen to be a non-returner, which is the third level of attainment, right? So the first is stream entrant, then there is the once returner, he only has to come back once, and there is the non-returner. So that's somebody who has lost any delight in the sensual world, but still delights in these jhana worlds, in these absorption worlds. And then finally, of course, full liberation with the arahat. Now, this particular experience of the cessation of feeling of perception can only be had to the top two, right? So you have to be a non-returner or an arahat in order to experience this. So therefore, if you are at that level, then you can read the page. But what we're interested in is really that such a level exists. Now, that point where perception and feeling come to an end is, for some people, an experience of nirvana. And for other writers, no, it's not. Now, the funny thing is that you can experience nirvana in the lower attainments. In fact, the first attainment is an experience of nirvana, even if only, as the Buddha says, like a flash of lightning, but you see everything, as it were. Everything to be seen is seen, but darkly. And therefore, it would seem that it doesn't quite equate with nibbana. But some people say it does, that the extinction of feeling and perception. And according to Dhammadina, you can't actually make a decision to do it. It does not occur to him, I shall attain cessation of perception and feeling, or I am attaining cessation of perception of feeling, nor afterwards, I have attained. It just comes when the time is ripe. And it's done, as I say, through this process of the jhana. Now, the interesting thing is that when a person comes out of that state, the three characteristics of existence are available to them. So the first one is the voidness contact. The voidness, that's the first thing they are aware of, which is, of course, the not self, right? Remember that word sunya, emptiness, which the Mahayana turned into a generalized concept of insubstantiality. Here, it's in the Theravada tradition, it's more to do with the emptiness of self, right? Then there's the signless contact, which is a funny way of saying that you see that everything is arising and passing away. Actually, what you see are consciousnesses arising and passing away. Remember, we can never experience the world out there as it is. When you're looking at a tree, you're not experiencing the tree as it is. You're experiencing the tree as your eyes will allow you to experience it. And then there's dukkha, of course, the desireless contact, which is the end of suffering. So that's this whole section here on the cessation of perception and feeling. And it's just good to know that there are such very high-level states. The whole experience of Nibbana is, shall we say, debated, which may come as a surprise to you. There are those schools that say it's like a blackout, like a almost like a very deep sleep. There's a disappearance, you might say. And this is definitely understood by those, say, in the Mahasi, connected to the Mahasi tradition, whereas those who come from the Ajahn Mun tradition, Ajahn Mahabua, Ajahn Chah, they would express it as pure awareness. The same seeming contradiction exists in Mahayana, where the Madhyamika people who follow Nagarjuna would talk about it as a blackout, as a state of deep unknowing, and the Yogacara people would see it as pure awareness. So people struggle with that, and one or two writers have tried to explain how that is, but basically that there seems to be these two types of experience which are both non-suffering, and that's the important thing, is non-suffering. So we can leave that for another day, for another time. So we can go on now to feeling. So again, Visakha, who remember was, still remains, the husband of Dhammadina, he asks, how many kinds of feeling are there? So I'll give you a moment there to answer that. How many kinds of feeling are there? It's another test. So there are three, are there not? Painful, pleasant, and neither painful nor pleasant. Now, what is a pleasant feeling? What is a painful feeling? What is a neither painful nor pleasant feeling? So whatever bodily or mental, or whatever is felt bodily or mentally, right? So the body and the heart, right? The heart feeling as pleasant and soothing is pleasant feeling. And whatever is felt as bodily or heart ways mentally painful and hurting is painful feeling. And whatever felt bodily or mentally is neither soothing nor hurting, that is neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling. Now, lady, what is pleasant and what is painful in regard to pleasant feeling? Okay, so what is pleasant and what is unpleasant in regard to pleasant feeling? So what is painful and what is pleasant in regard to painful feeling, and what is pleasant and what is painful in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Right, so we take it easy. So pleasant feeling is pleasant when it persists, painful when it changes, right? Now here, I think there's some, we have to understand this as our reaction to pleasant and unpleasant. As a pleasant feeling fades away, then a pleasant feeling is just fading away. But because we might be attached to that pleasant feeling, then there is a feeling of loss. And that's where the painfulness comes in. Or you could see it simply that as the pleasant feeling fades away, it's losing its pleasantness, and in that sense, it's becoming unpleasant. And so it's the same with painful feelings. When it persists, it's painful, but as it changes, it becomes pleasant. So one can understand that if you've got a pain and the pain slowly is fading away, it is experienced as something pleasant, nor pleasant feeling is pleasant when there is knowledge of it. So when you're aware of neutral feelings, they're not painful, they're not unpleasant, they're just generally okay. And and painful when you have no knowledge of it. So that's a bit of a conundrum. I've not been able to find why it's painful when you have no knowledge of it. Um, what I suggest is that when the feeling arises with the perception, right? If there is a feeling and there's no perception, then there's an underlying ignorance to it, and that, when it's recognized, is painful. But frankly, I've emailed somebody to find out if they understand that last sentence. So this is something that we can actually be aware of in our meditation. So there's a lovely, pleasant emotion, and as it passes away, it's losing its pleasantness, and in that sense, it's becoming unpleasant. When we have a painful feeling, such as a physical one, say pain in the knee, and it's slowly disappearing, and we see it disappearing, we can see that loss of pain is experienced as something which is pleasant. On top of that, of course, is our reaction, right? Which we've, during this time anyway, put to one side. So your reaction to pleasantness, of course, is to grasp it, to want to develop it. And as it fades away, of course, then you start getting worried and anxious. And that's another type of suffering. And if it's painful and your aversion to it, then the aversion itself is a state of suffering. So remember, there's pleasant feeling and unpleasant feeling, both physical and mental, which are quite natural. The Buddha has them too, but our reactions are unnecessary. So the next section is to do with underlying tendencies. Now, these underlying tendencies, they sit, shall we say, beneath our consciousness, beneath what's known as the mental continuum. And when something actually comes in which drops down, as it were, and excites the tendencies that are underneath that level of consciousness, then of course they pop up. So very simply, you walk into the kitchen and you can see the tea urn, and immediately you think, oh, I'll have a cup of tea. Of course, you might have thought that before you enter the kitchen, but on seeing something, something will arise, an underlying tendency will manifest. So, what underlying tendencies underlies pleasant feeling? What underlying tendency underlies pleasant feeling? And what for painful feeling, and for neither pleasant nor unpleasant? So, I'll let you guess. The underlying tendency to something that's pleasant is of course excitement, because that's how we feel when something pleasant comes up. We want to grasp it, and that's your tanha, that's your wrong desire. Now, this word is often translated as lust, but lust, of course, is normally understood to be a sexual thing. But the word raga, which is trying to translate, is excitement. Excitement, even uncontrolled passion for something. Now, that word excitement rings true for me in a consumerist society, because the whole point of consumerism is to make you constantly feel excited with the new, a new mobile phone, a new fashion. See, it's everything that's got to be new, and that new has to come up just before the previous new is beginning, just after, should we say, the previous new is beginning to die out, because then, of course, boredom arises and you wouldn't buy it. So you've always got to have something new, and that's to create that sort of bubbly excitement. The underlying tendency to aversion is of course for painful feeling, of course, the underlying tendency is aversion. You don't want it. So there again is your tanha, that's your wrong desire. And the underlying tendency underneath painful and unpainful is, of course, ignorance. Ignorance again is a slightly wrong word, because it's not that you're culpable, you're just not aware of it. So the underlying tendency is to be unaware of it. So once we become more sensitive to the body, for instance, we become aware of small sensations that arise. You're more in contact, you're more embodied, you might say. It's the same with emotions. You might not have felt emotions actually in the body, some people don't, but eventually through meditation, you actually start contacting emotions in the body. And you can feel also fine mental states within the body. So that's an opening up to the more finer feelings that we can experience. Now, the next question is, does the underlying tendency of excitement underlie pleasant feeling, all pleasant feeling? Does the underlying tendency of aversion underlie all painful feeling? And does the underlying tendency of ignorance underlie all neither painful nor pleasant feelings? And the answer, of course, is no. The underlying tendency doesn't always there. So sometimes, especially if we're practicing well, a pleasant feeling will come up without that desire for excitement, for holding on to it. Sometimes when unpleasant mental states comes up, we can be quite equanimous with them. So it's not necessary for these things to come up. And of course, ignorance doesn't have to be there. You can make yourself sensitive to your sensations, your feelings, your emotions and moods. So then the next question is, well, what should be abandoned in regard to pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither pleasant nor unpleasant feelings? So, of course, what should be abandoned is that very excitement, that very aversion, and that very ignorance. So that's pretty straightforward. We should abandon that. In fact, that's the second noble truth, where the Buddha states that tanha is the cause. This wrong desire is a cause of all our suffering, and our purpose is to abandon it, to let go of it. Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust does not have to be abandoned in regard to all pleasant feeling. Oh, sorry. Then he asks, does this have to be abandoned to all pleasant feeling? And of course, it doesn't have to be abandoned to all pleasant feeling because, well, we've just said it. So I'm getting confused. Okay, Visakha. Now, what she says, that these pleasant feelings don't have to be abandoned, the underlying lust does not have to be abandoned by way of these jhana states, these absorption states. So when you enter into an absorption state, then of course these pleasant, unpleasant feelings, they all get pushed down, they all get suppressed. And then finally, when somebody enters and abides in those places and touches upon nibbana, then there's a longing to continue that practice and work towards it. Now, the interesting thing is that with that, he abandons ignorance and the underlying tendency to ignorance. Does not underlie that. Okay, so now that's interesting in this sense that ignorance is one of the last fetters that hold you to this existence. And of course, you can't abandon ignorance itself. You can't abandon not knowing. What you can abandon is the product of not knowing, which is the sense of self, which is conceit. So with the ending of that sense of self and the conceit of self, the ignorance, of course, disappears. So that's a bit more subtle, you might say. Okay. And the final part is counterparts. What is the counterpart of pleasant feeling? So painful feeling is the counterpart, right? So, right, okay. What's the counterpart of painful feeling? Well, it's pleasant feeling is the counterpart. What is the counterpart of neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling? In this sense now, it's ignorance, which is the counterpart, right? So that's what is on the other side. What is the counterpart of ignorance? True knowledge is the counterpart of ignorance. So in other words, seeing things as they really are is going to undermine ignorance. What is the counterpart of true knowledge? Deliverance is the counterpart of true knowledge. So in other words, you have to move towards deliverance, or shall we say, the true knowledge leads you to deliverance. This word patibhaga, which is being translated here, both means opposition, but also means supplementary. So here we're sort of coming the other way. Because of true ignorance, we're moving into deliverance. And the counterpart of deliverance, of course, is nibbana. Then he asks, lady, what is the counterpart to nibbana? Friend Visakha, you have pushed this line of questioning too far. You are not able to grasp the limit to questions, all right? So there's a limit to what questions can get you to. For the holy life, friend Visakha, merges in Nibbana, culminates in Nibbana, ends in Nibbana. If you wish, friends Visakha, go to the Blessed One and ask him about the meaning of this. As the Blessed One explains it to you, so you should remember it. So questions can only take you so far. After that, you've got to start practicing. But remember that Visakha is already a non-returner. And really, he's come along to see how his ex-wife understands the Dharma now that she's a full Arahat. Now, the next bit, of course, is interesting because this shows a relationship which would have been very, very strange, I think, for those times. Then the lay follower Visakha, having delighted and rejoiced in the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina's words, rose from his seat, and after paying homage to her, keeping her on his right, he went to see the Blessed One. So that a man should behave like that towards a woman must have been, especially if there was an audience there, must have been, should we say, interesting. And then he goes to the Blessed One and of course gives the whole entire conversation that he's had to the Buddha. And the Buddha replies, the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina is wise, Visakha. Bhikkhuni Dhammadina has great wisdom. If you had asked me the meaning of this, I would have explained it to you in the same way that Bhikkhuni Dhammadina has explained it. Such is its meaning, and so you should remember it. And that was what the Blessed One said. And the lay follower, Visakha, he was a lay person at the third level of attainment, was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So there we have this wonderful discourse of questions and answers for the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina, who was a fully liberated being. So I hope you found that inspirational, and it will in fact fire you to continue your practice and attain full liberation from all suffering sooner rather than later. So we can sit for a little while.